He was stripped of his right to vote, but he would find other ways to bring about change. For nearly 20 years, Bosberg operated his barbershop and clothes cleaning service in plain view of Erie's most prominent citizens. Just 2 doors away was Pierre Simon Vincent Hammett, a successful banker and salt trader whose black servant mysteriously disappeared soon after Bosberg moved into the neighborhood. He had help from free people of color and from radical white sympathizers who formed the Erie County Anti-Slavery Society. Throughout northwestern Pennsylvania, strong voices of opposition were beginning to challenge the institution of slavery. Hamilton was a partially blind ex-slave who helped lead others to freedom. John Brown, surveyor, tanner, postmaster, and preacher whose mission would bring him a violent end. An African-American sailor named Benjamin Bass Fleming, who knew the waterways like the back of his hand. Cynthia Catlin Miller, who rallied physicians, farmers, lumbermen, and ladies and wouldn't take no for an answer. And George Washington Lewis, a liberated slave from Charlottesville, Virginia, who, together with his wife Caroline, established a brave new colony called Pandonaria. From free black communities to middle-class white society, in small villages and on farms, they defied race and gender in what would become America's first civil rights movement. But in the same way fog envelops a town, the Underground Railroad is clouded by myth and obscured by legend. Neither underground nor a railroad, it was an illegal network to help slaves escape to freedom. Sometimes spontaneous, sometimes highly organized, it drew people together for a common purpose.
The Underground Railroad is not about trapdoors or hidden tunnels or secret compartments. It's about the struggle to end slavery and how basic, ordinary people did extraordinary things when faced with human need.
Pennsylvania's southern border stretched more than 280 miles along the Mason-Dixon line, like a line in the sand between north and south, good and evil. To the north was Erie, whose proximity to Canada made it a natural destination for escaping slaves. At the height of Underground Railroad activity, from 1830 until the end of the Civil War, only about 1,000 or 2,000 runaways each year reached the north, a small fraction of the 4 million people held in bondage. Some went to Florida, others to Mexico, many wishing to stay in close contact with family members still enslaved, remained in the same vicinity of their own farms and plantations.
The obstacles that slaves confronted to make it to the north were great, especially if they ran away from plantations in the lower south of Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, and Louisiana. Those who were successful in crossing the Ohio River or crossing the Pennsylvania border were often the most fortunate, the luckiest, the most intelligent, the wisest, and able to disguise themselves and to demean themselves in a way that would fool whites along the way.
Can you imagine, even today, as we drive into the automobiles coming across the great state of Pennsylvania, the mountains, the rivers, the hills, it takes hours the way it seems, and you wonder, how do these people make it? You know, how do they make it over the hills, in the rivers, in the snow, in the rain, in the hot, with bloodhounds searching, and treacherous spies, black spies, and white spies? The Underground Railroad was not a romantic thing, per se, institution. People died. People were taken back.
Wheeling, West Virginia had 2 slave markets. So 40 miles from here, people were being bought and sold. we tend to forget, because of what happened during the Civil War, that West Virginia was not a separate state. That was the western side of Virginia, a slave-holding state. It has this line that nobody can see. And on one side, a human being based on the color of his skin is property, and on the other side is a free person with all the claims to citizenship.
Fugitives from bordering states reached safe houses in western Pennsylvania by following the streams and canals that flowed into the Ohio, Allegheny, and the Monongahela rivers.
Follow the stream, but don't limit yourself to the shore. Get in the water. That's a better protection. Chances are you will leave no scent, no trace, no footprint of any kind for those who are trying to find you.
The Monongahela is kind of special too because it's one of our rivers in the world that flows from the south to the north. And that too would give indication that you were headed in the proper direction.
At the confluence of three rivers stood Pittsburgh, a developing industrial city that by 1850 was home to more than 1,900 free black residents. An aggressive force in conducting their brethren to freedom, they started vigilance committees, kidnapped slaves from their masters, and forwarded them on to other communities where they could find safe haven. It was not always smooth sailing. At the core of the Underground Railroad is an argument about the nature of American slavery and the moral dilemma it presented. Members of anti-slavery societies came face to face with slave owners and bounty hunters. Sheriff's deputies patrolled the waterfront. Colonization societies intent on deporting blacks to Africa flourished. Even some of the most ardent abolitionists did not believe blacks were the equals. Many settlers brought enslaved Africans with them. Others engaged in buying and selling. Rufus Reed traded 100 barrels of salt for George Logan, a slave who was later put in charge of transporting materials on the Great Lakes and inland waterways. On March 1st, 1780, Pennsylvania became the first state to pass a gradual abolition act. Those born before March 1st remained slaves for life. Those born after March 1st would be freed at the age of 28. The act was a compromise between humanitarians and slave owners who wanted to keep their property.
It was gradual. It did not abolish slavery. And you also have to take into consideration the longevity of the African. The average American only lived to be about age 40, around 1800. Africans lived a shorter time period. So 28 years was a life sentence. And they could be sold arbitrarily to anyone. If the master, as in the master had financial difficulties, they would rent them out or sell them.
Though the numbers of slaves in Pennsylvania began to dwindle by 1830, slavery was not completely abolished for another generation.
So while Pennsylvania was a free state, certainly abolitionists were a minority. And they were involved on all different levels. Some people were very active in terms of writing and debating. Others were active in terms of giving aid to the fugitives. And then there were all levels of people in the middle.
Their decision to get involved was not an easy one. The northern economy depended on slavery.
By 1840, cotton is more valuable than everything else the United States exports put together. So the value of slaves is tremendous. By the time of the Civil War, by 1860, the dollar value of slave property is greater than the dollar value of all of America's railroads, all of America's banks, all of America's manufacturing put together. Slavery is no sideshow in American society. It is very much the main event.
Did my Lord deliver Daniel?
Hamilton Waters was expected in Harbor Creek by sunset, just enough time to collect his passengers from Hemlock Station and take them east on Buffalo Road to Frank Henry's place. A skiff was waiting at the mouth of 4 Mile Creek, a few hundred yards beyond the stone house where the order of drilled. The darkness fell. A schooner would take them to Long Point, Ontario, about 20 miles across Lake Erie. It was dangerous work. Earlier that same year, an angry mob threatened Frederick Douglass himself when he came to Erie at the invitation of Henry Catlin, the editor of a local abolitionist newspaper called The True American. Douglass came anyway and delivered a speech entitled Unity of the Human Race. Hamilton Waters knew these struggles all too well. It was not long after the 1830 Negro Rights Convention in Philadelphia that Waters, a partially blind slave in Somerset County, Maryland, hired himself out so he could buy his mother's freedom along with his own. In 1835, freedom papers in hand, they set out for the North. Eventually, Hamilton married and settled in Erie, where he found work as a clothes crusher in Vosburgh's barber shop. Free black communities in western Pennsylvania were small, but they were supportive. Many residents were former slaves, freed when their terms of service expired under gradual abolition. Some, like Waters, purchased their freedom and migrated north. Together they would find employment, build churches, and secure an education, relying on friends and family in time of need. Tonight was one of those times. With help from a young boy, Waters plodded on, stopping to rest at the Wesleyville Methodist Church, which provided safe haven on more than one occasion. His blindness was making his work more difficult, and this would be one of his last trips. Waters had lived long enough to see his daughter Elizabeth give the commencement speech at her graduation in 1855 from Avery College in Pittsburgh. Trained as a teacher, she taught at the colored school, educating the children of newly freed slaves. Hamilton approved of Elizabeth's marriage to abolitionist Henry Burleigh, a founder of the Equal Rights League, and celebrated the birth of their children, Reginald and Harry Burleigh. His grandsons would later accompany him on his evening rounds, lighting lamps through the streets of Erie, while he rang out the old plantation songs in his clear, distinctive voice. They would remember those nights for the rest of their lives. Hamilton Waters died on February 6, 1877, at the age of 77. The former slave had no idea his plantation songs would someday reach an international audience and inspire the famous Czech composer Anton Dvořák's New World Symphony, or that his grandson Harry Burleigh would work tirelessly for the cultural and political advancement of his race. Through Burleigh's artistic arrangements of more than 200 spirituals, his grandfather's sorrow songs were presented with dignity and elegance.
Their worth is weakened unless they are done impressively. For through these songs breathes the hope, the faith in the ultimate justice and brotherhood of man. The cadences of sorrow invariably turn to joy, and the message is ever manifest that eventually deliverance from all that hinders and oppresses the soul will come, and man, every man, will be free. Let my people go.
John Brown believed he was ordained by God to lead enslaved Africans to freedom. He would carry his crusade against slavery across a dozen states and ultimately to its violent end at Harper's Ferry. But not before he'd spent 10 whole years in one place, deep in the Pennsylvania woods at Randolph. Never mind that there were only a few slaves and about 41 free black persons living in Crawford County at the time, and they were in Meadville about 12 miles away. He would find them, eventually, or they would find him. For the moment, he was preoccupied with establishing a tannery on 200 acres of the finest oak and hemlock he'd ever seen. Within the year, he had cleared 25 acres and moved his family from Hudson, Ohio.
John Brown was born in Torrington, Connecticut in 1800, the same year that Nat Turner, who started the largest slave revolt in history in 1831 in Southampton, Virginia.